Hello, everyone. My name is Mercedes Raphael, and I'm a manager on our workforce programs team at the Partnership for Public Service. For those of you not familiar with the partnership, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to build a better government and stronger democracy through policy advocacy, leadership development, workforce programming, and convening leaders across organizations and sectors. The most tangible aspect is seen through our support for the federal workforce by sharing resources, providing plain language explainers, and amplifying the stories of the incredible work that federal employees do for our country every single day. Thank you for your service. I want to share a few notes before digging into today's conversation and introducing today's moderator. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit a question through the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer what we can. If you would like your question to remain anonymous, please be sure to click on that checkbox before submitting your question. Given the complexity and nuances of the topics we discuss, we may not be able to address every question or associated circumstance that comes up today. However, we will continue to hold FedSupport webinars on a regular basis to dig into additional topics. If you miss a talking point or want to revisit parts of our conversation that are most relevant to you, you can find the recording of this webinar, as well as previous ones, on our FedSupport Hub. The Hub not only contains webinar recordings, but also houses other critical information to support the federal workforce amid today's changing government landscape. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Karen Lee, a senior leader with a distinctive blend of executive level policy, legal, and public sector program administration and management experience, both in and out of the federal government. Karen is a co-founder of FedsForward, the organization we are partnering with today to make this webinar happen. FedsForward is an organization comprised of former civil servants with deep experience across federal agencies committed to uplifting the talent and dedication of the public workforce. They believe in the unique value of civil servants, civil servants bring to roles beyond government and do this work for them, with them, and because of them. We are very excited to have Karen and FedsForward with us today. And Karen, I will pop it over to you.
Mercedes, thank you so much. And thank you for that warm and generous introduction. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you today. Good evening. My name is Karen Lee, and I am so excited to moderate today's conversation about career transitions in environmental and outdoor focused work. As Mercedes mentioned, I am a co-founder of FedsForward, where we work every single day with the fundamental belief that federal talent represents one of America's most underutilized assets. And at FedsForward, we see federal professionals who've managed trillion-dollar budgets, navigated complex regulatory landscapes, and solved some of society's most challenging and pressing problems. And yet, when these talented individuals consider transitions beyond the federal government, they sometimes struggle to translate their extraordinary expertise into language that resonates with other sectors. And that's exactly what we're here today to address. Specifically, for those of you who are passionate about environmental stewardship, conservation, and outdoor mission work, we're going to be talking about how you can transition that mission-focused orientation to areas outside of the government, to all sectors of the economy. So before we dive in, let me outline what we hope to accomplish in our time together tonight. First, we want to showcase the breadth of career opportunities tied to outdoor, environmental, and climate work, going far beyond what might initially come to mind. Second, we'll explore how different sectors approach environmental and climate challenges, understanding their unique perspectives, their methodologies, and roles in the broader ecosystem. This isn't about finding places to do the same work as you may have done in the government, but understanding how private companies, nonprofits, and other organizations tackle these same issues from fundamentally different angles, potentially. And third, we want to illuminate today how these different approaches create complementary strategies for addressing environmental challenges. and where you as federal professionals could find it that your experience and expertise is valued in unexpected ways within this larger ecosystem. Throughout our conversation, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. We'll try and address as many as we can tonight. With no more delay, let me introduce our distinguished panel who will help us explore these pathways. I would love for each of you to just introduce yourself and your extraordinary background for those today and who may be listening afterwards. I'll start first with Jenny Moffett.
Well, thank you, Karen. And it is just a pleasure to be on tonight with all of you. And I just want to echo what you said, Karen, about and Mercedes about thanking everyone for the work that you do as public servants. So as you said, my name is Jenny Lester Moffett. I am a senior fellow at American Farmland Trust. I recently transitioned out of federal service. I was Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs, which is a big mouthful, at the United States Department of Agriculture. And in that role, I had the Animal Plant Health Inspection Services and the Agricultural Marketing Services, AMS, within my portfolio and my mission area there. At American Farmland Trust, we're partnering with federal agencies all of the time. And I think that's really important. But I also previously, before I came to USDA, worked for the state government. I worked for the state of California for 6.5 years as well. So I bring to this conversation a mix of working in the nonprofit sector, a mix of working in federal, but then also the state sector. So I think I'll pass it along back to you, Karen, so we can keep this conversation going.
Jenny, thank you so much. You're bringing such a breadth of background and knowledge to tonight's conversation. Next, I'll introduce Meryl Harrell.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Karen. And thanks, Mercedes. It is so good to be here. And I also want to echo just deep appreciation and thanks for all the service of everyone who is on this, listening to this webinar, your past service, your current service, and your future service. I'm Meryl Harrell. I formerly served as the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at USDA, worked very closely with the Forest Service, and many other agencies within USDA and partners. I currently lead Friends of the Forest Service, which is a nonpartisan network to speak to the importance of the U.S. Forest Service and its multiple use mission, its lands, its people, and its partners, and to bring people together to find common ground. I've also previously transitioned out of federal service before, and have had the opportunity to get to work with nonprofit organizations, stewardship organizations, for-profit entities, state, local, and other government and other federal agencies, tribal partners, academic partners. So I'm really excited for the conversation and being able to provide whatever advice, help, and support we can share in today's call.
Meryl, thank you. And that career transition of in and out of government is going to be so valuable to explore today, as well as all the different kinds of organizations you've been with. So thank you. And last but not least, Peter Murchie.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to the Partnership for Public Service and you at FedsForward for all you do, and also hosting this. And I'm humbled to be a part of this panel, and also express strong and just deep appreciation for all those that are on that are existing or former folks from federal service. A little background for me: I resigned from the Environmental Protection Agency in April. And so I've kind of gotten a recent perspective on that transition. I'm now with the Environmental Protection Network as the Senior Director for Policy and Public Affairs. And within that space, I just want to highlight, we do have as well partnerships with Partnership for Public Service and FedsForward around civil service resilience, and both doing things like this for folks to have them be seen in a space for ideas about to help them make their own decisions for themselves. Also, just to highlight the importance of the concept of public service and federal service, and to keep that forefront. I think we're all here probably many of us, because we are dealing or have dealt with the stress of attack on that, and want to do our best to support folks that are going through it. For me personally, I've spent 30 years at the Environmental Protection Agency. I was a private sector consultant before then. Although I've been with EPA, my background is in public health. And I think thinking about that mix of health and environment is also key for thinking about your own transitions. Um, I will say that in my from a sector standpoint, I'm now with a nonprofit NGO doing a variety of different things. But in my career, which has helped me think through my transition, I work very closely with states, tribes, public-private partnerships with a variety of different sectors. And I think there's a lot of, and we're going to get to this, there's a lot that you may not be thinking about your own background, experience, and skill set that is going to help you be successful in your next steps for your career transition. So hopefully I can be helpful in that conversation today. And thank you again. And Karen, back to you.
That is a perfect transition, Peter, and I'm so excited about this conversation. So let's just dig in. No time to waste. Where Peter, you noted, and rightly so, that in federal government there is such valuable experience that can be used on the outside. It'd be wonderful to hear from this panel what you would say is perhaps one specific federal function or expertise area that you found to be the most valuable as you've transitioned out of government at any stage in your career.
Yeah, well, everybody is touched by government. And so just the base understanding of how government works, what it does well and what it doesn't do well, and how it functions, and being on the side of working with communities, working with partners, stakeholders, however you frame them, is a huge value to others outside of government. Right? That in itself is helpful for people because most everybody has some connection to working on policy or getting permitted or needing the expertise and the science and other guidance that's in government, and it's hard to navigate that. So just that experience you have in your own space of how government works is of real value to people. I want to add as well, I also managed a lot of money, both as frontline project officer for grants, and so a lot of what government does is provide funding out there into the world, and understanding how funding works and how to navigate funding systems and controls and all that stuff is of extreme value to a lot of folks out there. And hopefully we get back to a place where funding is there, but that's a huge resource for organizations and others that work with government.
Peter, that's such a great point, that the complexity of and the size of the federal budget and what you have the opportunity to manage is unmatched, as well as just being in the room where most of the country doesn't get to be in the room for the decisions that we see in the federal government. Jenny, Meryl, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with Peter. Just the innate understanding and experience of navigating federal agencies, federal programs, dollars, processes is really, really valuable. Your appreciation of what a good partner looks like can be really important, and you can really help others be much more effective in their work with federal friends. And also just, it's a threshold barrier for many outside government to be able to even understand what programs are available, what dollars are available, how do you navigate those programs, who do you call, what kinds of things need to be in an application or a partnership proposal. So your appreciation and knowledge and understanding of what those systems look like and what they look like when there are good relationships with others outside of the federal family can be really so helpful and can unlock so many doors for partners who are outside of the federal family.
Meryl, your point that there's such an having an implicit understanding of interests of the federal government and being able from the outside to recognize that and then offer opportunities for collaboration, partnership based on that. That's such an extraordinary point. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize for me, one of the biggest things that I've really taken away and utilized a lot this year is that deep understanding of operations in the federal government, whether that is how decisions are made, like you just said, Meryl, and being able to, effectively be able to participate in you are for all of our organizations in the private sector to be able to participate and partner with the federal government, I think is really important, and state governments too. I would say also, in addition to what Peter talked about, right? There's funding and understanding different funding pots and how or where they can be used and what are the different constraints is something that I've tapped a lot and understanding this year. And then also, I'd say rulemaking. I came from a part of the mission area of USDA where we did a lot of regulatory programs and rulemaking, and understanding that rulemaking process and how to make sure that that whether it's the nonprofit sector or the private sector participates in that rulemaking, knowing the ins and outs and the intricacies is something that I would have never thought would be so valuable, but certainly have taken away a lot this year.
Jenny, the rulemaking point, I think, oftentimes is not well understood, and the complexity and sometimes the mundaneness of it is overlooked, where the power of things like the Paperwork Reduction Act in those forms, to your point, is unknown and yet so influential. So thank you for that as well. I want to now dive into something that's not as well understood. Now that we have a great sense of how we as feds and former feds bring unmatched value in ways that others might not having had that experience, I'd love to move into how different sectors approach the same environmental challenges that you've worked on, but perhaps from some different perspectives. Could you help us understand how the sectors that you've worked in outside of the government approach environmental and climate issues differently than what you've seen from a government agency perspective? What might be some unique approaches, timelines, success metrics, or constraints? And importantly, what role does any given sector that you may have worked in outside the government play in the larger ecosystem of the environmental issues in which you've been engaged in?
I can jump in. I think of the Forest Service, and I'll speak from that perspective, as anchoring a web of relationships, a connected web of relationships. And the Forest Service may be at the center of that web of connections, but other entities are on each of those other strands, and they're connected with one another. So if I think about the relationship with state, tribal, or local governments, if I think about the relationships with research and development with academic partners, or if you think about the firefighting workforce with all of the different firefighting agencies that get deployed to an incident, if you think about the communities that are adjacent to the lands that are public lands, if you think about state, private, local, urban, or community forests, and those who are responsible for stewarding those lands, nonprofit partners, for-profit partners, and industry. All of those entities and parts of that broad sector are incredibly important for the stewardship of resources and lands, all hands, all lands, across the board, and for both working and supporting quality of life in communities, economic opportunity, and the well-being of the environment and natural resources that are being stewarded. So each of those different perspectives and those different parts of the sector are going to bring a different perspective to the table, and they're going to be working on one or more parts of that web. But I think it's really important to recognize that each of those pieces of that full spectrum have value, and to think about, as you're transitioning, what brings passion for you? What part of the mission are you most excited about continuing to be able to deliver? Because what I know and so appreciate about civil servants is you have the skills, you have the knowledge, you have the passion, you have the mission orientation. So it's really about looking at that universe of actors within that sphere of influence and thinking about where there are opportunities for a good fit with your personality, your interests, your skills, and recognizing that there's going to be a way to have that impact and that different parts of the sector are going to bring different pieces of the puzzle to the table.
Yeah, I'd add to that, now several months outside of federal service, I think impact has been a lot of what I've been really thinking about and mulling on in this transition out of federal service. Because I will say, working in the federal government is incredibly rewarding because we have this broad perspective, right? And we are working with all types of stakeholders, like Meryl just described. And so that broader scope, that larger aperture that we have in federal service is something that's really remarkable. And I think it just goes into that impact. That said, I will say, working in the nonprofit, so American Farmland Trust, we're working on saving the land that sustains us, protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. All of that really aligns those mission, and so many other organizations just like ours really aligns with the work that is done across federal government, right? And so we're working with, and we have soil scientists on staff, hydrologists, people who are gathering data on land transfer, all of those different components, and I can talk about the USDA family, whether it's at NRCS, and the breadth of knowledge that staff have at NRCS, all the way to the statistics agencies, the Economic Research Services and NAS, all of those different components. We are tapping and working with them in so many different ways. And so how our impact on the outside works is really driven through a strong partnership with federal and state government. And I would say also in the private sector as well. And that web that Meryl talked about, I think is really important, that continues and that strengthens. But I think, thinking about impact versus now maybe more in influence and how we're driving in our own specific space on the outside, a different component of that, I think is really something to weigh as you're thinking about a transition out of federal service or what next in your career. It's really thinking about, like Meryl said, what are the things that really drive you? What is that mission that you're really focused on in your current role, and how, where are the different places that you can continue to drive and make the most impact as possible?
Yeah, I'm in an interesting space that I left the agency and am now a part of a nonprofit that's focused on the agency. So it's it's a little specialized. But one thing I'll say is that the one thing I'm finding is that I'm bringing a lot, and I kind of mentioned this up front, I'm bringing a lot of inside information into the nonprofit space and the advocacy space that's super helpful for folks. There's so many great people in the nonprofit sector that haven't worked in government. Now they're doing great things, they've got great ideas, they're very good at what they do, but being part of those teams that has a mix of different approaches has been really important. I think I provided some real value just being a resource for them to say, hey, how did this, I mean, I mentioned this already, how did this actually work? What's a good strategy to be effective and support folks there and things like that. The other thing I want to say is that it's a challenging time. I think we're here because it's challenging. A lot of folks are leaving. There's a lot of impacts on funding into this space of climate and environment and public health, where lots of folks are needing to look at, there's not as many jobs out there in those spaces. So the other thing I've seen is folks are leaving and maybe not finding that career transition that is exactly what they want to do around that mission that they care about the most. But I will say this, and I'm not saying I want to add to your list of things to do, but there are other ways to make impact with your time and your expertise, even if you're not getting paid for it, right? So it's just, you can look, if you're feeling like you're not in that mission space that you want to be most impactful, but you're driven, there's other ways to get involved locally, and I think most of my peers were already involved volunteering locally and local nonprofits on key issues, conservation, even in their federal careers. But it's also something to think about to keep yourself engaged in that service model, even if you're not able to find that right transition that you really want in the moment. It also can help lead to that transition later back into a space that you really want to be in. And then lastly, a lot of federal folks and federal agencies can get very specialized, right? So lawyers, engineers, especially EPA, we have a lot of that. I will say all of those skill sets and experiences, even if you've been working in government, if you look at some of the job boards, a lot of people are hiring lawyers right now in the environmental climate space because there's a lot of stuff happening in the litigation space. So there's also ways of thinking about your own specialized space that isn't as generic and what that means for finding, your niche with private sector or nonprofit sector or states. And a lot of my colleagues are ending up with local government and state agencies as well. I'm seeing a trend there because they're in many states are looking to prioritize hiring good federal folks. So it's another space to be looking at as you think about your impact, especially in your own geography. So I was a regional federal employee. I wasn't in DC. And so a lot of folks don't want to move. And so those kinds of jobs tend to be local government, state government, local conservation groups, environmental groups.
This is a really great point I want to dig into just a little more, which is I've heard the word impact used many times, and this community, one focused on the environment and the outdoors, so deeply cares about impact. I'd love to explore just a little more this concept of how impact looks different when you're outside of government. Jenny, you noted, I thought it was very poignant that you used the words, impact as influence in government that might be different from impact on the outside. Would love to hear any of your thoughts on how you would describe impact in a nonprofit in the environmental space that might be distinct from that in government, state, local government, consulting or otherwise.
Yeah, so I recently had a conversation with a former colleague who had recently taken one of the DRPs at USDA, really as she was starting to explore what next for her career. And this came up in our conversation as she was thinking about different pathways that she might be looking. And I think it's oftentimes in our jobs and in the federal and even I would say the state workforce, we are looking pretty broad across sectors, and the opportunity, I will say, trying to spin it in a positive way. The opportunity in the private sector is you can go pretty deep into some areas, and to really harness something that that perhaps you had the opportunity to really learn more in the federal service and then be able to apply in a much deeper and on the ground way in some aspects. Now, I will say, there are, and Meryl certainly can speak to it with Forest Service and the same with NRCS and a lot of the staff that we have in the federal service, that they are very deeply rooted in communities and doing work on impactful work right there on the ground with boots on the ground. But it's a way in the private sector to do that as well. I would also say, I speak right now from the nonprofit sector, but from the for-profit sector as well, where I don't have as much experience in a corporation, but I ran my family's farming operation. Having the skill sets that the federal workforce has to be able to really take something that has at a, I would say, kind of a higher level and really dive it deep into what that means for corporations. They're looking for those skill sets. So I reminded her, I was like, you have developed programs, you have created certification systems, the ins and outs of all of these different things. And so what are some of the pieces and the components of what you have done that really drives your interest, and how can the private sector benefit from that? How can a nonprofit sector benefit from it? How can maybe even academia perhaps benefit from it as well?
Jenny, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to build on that, but go ahead, Karen. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna note, Jenny, your point about working your family's farm. I can imagine the impact there was being able to apply generally the principles of conservation, growing organic goods. It was an organic walnut farm. It's all right. And so being able to apply that framework at from a federal government perspective, but apply it on the farm, I could imagine just doing it is so impactful.
Yeah, it is
So
incredibly rewarding to grow food.
yeah, I can't wait to have some of those walnuts. What I jumped in, I apologize, is all one of the challenges of us being federal. I mean, if you've done it recently, our resumes are not the best for these other sectors. I mean, my USA Jobs resume for applying for federal jobs in my career is like 6 pages long because you're redundant and you have all kind of stuff. What I'm trying to say here is that they're thinking about your skills that are universal, that any organization would want, and try to get it out of government speak into kind of what those folks would be. So project management, I mean, that's government speak too. But everybody wants somebody that can do good project management. Most folks in federal service have managed projects, developed projects, programs. So trying to translate that, not running away from your federal service lens of it, but just basic skill sets that are good in any organization. You know, that you're good at facilitation, that you're good at leading teams, that you're a good team member, like, strategy and vision, right? A lot of folks need that in their spaces. So there's some universal skills and skill sets that I'm sure you have if you were a great federal servant, that you can tweak a little bit in the framing about what you did in those spaces, because any nonprofit, any private sector, state, they're looking for those things, even if outside of the specific expertise. And so think about that and your experiences there and how to talk about that effectively when you're out there selling yourself into these new transition spaces.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on two of those points. One on Peter's point, a good friend of mine in the Forest Service likes to say that the agency has professions literally from A to Z. And that's true across the federal family. So being able to look at the professional skills that you have and the positions you've been in, and look at other places that have those professional roles to fill and need those translatable skills, can really open the field for what's possible as you're transitioning out. So I really appreciate that point, Peter. And then Jenny, I'd love to pick up on the point you made around different geographic scales, and thinking about what impact looks like, from the farm to the community and then up. And there are ways to translate what you bring to the table at each of those geographic scales. I got to work while I was at USDA on a project with a local community that was trying to create trail access that they had not had before. And that took the Forest Service, but it took the Forest Service not leading the table, but sitting at the table with a local camp leader, a woman who was leading a local business collaborative and community. There was an academic partner thinking about career pathways for creating opportunities locally. There was a recreation business. There were breweries. There was a construction company there who pitched in. So just being able to mobilize the local community to come together to build an asset that was going to benefit the community as a whole took all of those different people coming together and creating this vision, and then figuring out how to support it. Philanthropy was involved by finding ways to fund the project. State leaders were involved, community leaders, county leaders, Chamber of Commerce. So that was kind of a microcosm of all of the different impact opportunities that were there. I also had the chance to work closely the last time I was transitioning out of government with a nonprofit organization that does trail stewardship and workforce development in collaboration with 10 different national forests in 8 states. So then that's a regional opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder and be boots on the ground doing stewardship work, working with communities, working with partners, training the next generation at that regional level. And then I also had the chance to work with an industry partner and a nonprofit partner, both of whom were looking at national level policy considerations and wanted to know, how do you think about watershed conservation at the national level? How do you think about farm bill policy? And, we're again in a time where there's the opportunity to think about that national level policy. So at any of those levels, you can think about how the knowledge that you have could create that vector for impact, and think about what partners might be working on those different areas of impact, and how you might be able to contribute and benefit to.
Yeah, I just want to re-up what you said there, Meryl. It takes a whole village, and often in public service, what we're doing is we are serving as the convening factor. And so I would say I would encourage, as everyone who's thinking about where next, what next, is who in that village of community people, whether it's the trailhead, or I champion a lot of work that we had been doing at the Agricultural Marketing Services on local and regional food systems, where we were bringing together hundreds of different partners in different levels of community. Who at that table, was there, and what part of the table would you like to be at, and bringing into that network that is going to continue for a long time?
I love this conversation so much because in my head, I have so many analogies rolling of the table and the village. And maybe it's because we're going to the fall, I'm thinking about football. And I will say, sometimes I think as we sit in the federal government, we think we make all the plays. And I remember when I left government, I felt dejected that I didn't have a .gov email because I didn't get to make the plays anymore. And I think what you're inspiring us to think about today is the entire team is more than just the quarterback. And all those roles are really important. They all make the plays and they all get the ball down the field. And what you're suggesting is, in the roles that we've had in the government, as we've had an opportunity to see all those different players, what's the next position we'd like that might spark some joy for us in using those talents, be it on offense or defense. There are lots of different opportunities. And so I think that as you're framing it, it's just so valuable. And so thank you. Thank you for offering that. I wanted to now connect back to Peter, a point that you've put on the table for us, which is about skills translation, because this is something that we hear time and time again as we've moved through this. And actually, through the years, as every Fed who's left government has struggled with this point, and at FedsForward, this is a deep irritation of ours, that everybody struggles with it and we don't talk about it. And so now we're going to talk about it, which is, how do we translate those skills and communicate that? And we've touched a little bit about this point, but I'd love to get this panel's thoughts about some perhaps surprising combinations of federal expertise combined with other skills that create unique opportunities on the outside.
I can hop in. There's a question in the chat about private sector. And so one thought there is to look for corporate mission alignment and values, and think about what is the business model, and how can you translate your skills, whether it's knowing what the risks and vulnerabilities are from a climate point of view, or a resilience point of view on the ground that might impact operations, or whether it's knowing opportunities to establish values-based partnerships that will be meaningful for that company's mission or product or employees. or being able to think about the policy or regulatory framework, or the science and knowledge that's needed. Any of those can be really good translatable skills to be able to highlight, and be able to do some research on the company that you might be interested in or interviewing with, and think about how you can demonstrate that what you bring to the table relates to the position or the mission of that entity. And that's really true beyond private sector. If you think about where we started this conversation around just the knowledge that you have from understanding how things work, and Jenny's highlights around on the nonprofit side, and Peter as well, just being able to help translate that and help map out where new opportunities might be, and where new partnerships, how good partnerships can be created, how to convene voices. You've got skills and knowledge that are different from what others can bring to the table. So thinking about how to translate that, but then also how to translate the skills that somebody would need to have to be a good fit for that potential new employer. Think about all of those different things as you're looking to new opportunities.
When I was first starting the process of transitioning out of the federal service, I sought some guidance from mentors and other people who had done the same. And that was the first thing they said is, look at your resume and the words that you're using. And Peter talked a little bit about this as well, because the words that we use in government are different. Just translating those to private sector or nonprofit sector, getting some coaching and some help to think about what that looks like. Peter talked about project management. Of course, that is an incredibly desirable skill set. But there are so many other different aspects, data management, and being able to, as public servants, we are stewards of government resources, whether that is land resources, funding, a myriad of different government resources, right? And we are responsive to Congress. We are responsive to our agencies. We are responsive, of course, to our mission of the work. And so also being able to say, okay, we didn't just operate because we operated because we had different direction telling us and guiding us in what to do. And I think that is something to translate also as well into your resume is being able to show the impact of your work, so that Congress has an understanding of what they're funding and why they're funding it, but then also the people who you're serving, and what that impact is. And so being able to translate that into your resume and how you prepare in interviews, how you talk about the work that you do, I think is really a critical function, and something that I think just think about is and talk with friends who are in the private sector, talk with former colleagues that are in the private sector now of what some of those terms that we just don't use in government, but we use in the private sector.
This is a great piece of advice that that you're putting on the table, which is, looking very tactically at your resume and putting those words out there to somebody a good friend or someone else who might sit in another sector and say, how would you say this? Here's what it is. How would you say this from a corporate perspective? And what I'm hearing behind the words and that advice is the implicit point that everything that we do in government, there is an analog outside. They do that same stuff. They just call it something different. And we just need to unlock those magical words, and perhaps sitting down with someone to help us do that we know who sits in the other sector might be the Rosetta Stone. Peter, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we maybe jumped away from the question, but I like where we're headed around some practical things to think about. The other is sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. I'll just say that. And so really taking advantage, like really sitting down for yourself, like what is my network right now? Where do I have strengths in that to help me think through transition to something different? And what gaps do I have? And what do I want to go do to try to fill those gaps in who I know? Right. So a couple of suggestions. I'm not sure. I know EPA has a very robust alumni association. It's been a lot of social before, but it's also a space to just vent and be with people. But you could also make connections of connections, like, oh, you're interested in this? Well, so and so did this 5 years ago, and we can help connect you up with that person who left and now they're in state agency or whatever it is. But like put yourself out there a little bit into spaces that are already there for you to tap into because of who you are. Right. And so alumni associations, ours, we partner with the Alumni Association, but, there's folks that, Forest Service, I'm guessing there's the same. So that's one thing. And then the other is, uh, be a little bit fearless about making new connections. And honestly, the worst thing that can happen is they don't have time for you and they won't respond or whatever. But, be thoughtful about it, but try to connect with people and build relationship. And whether it's formal or not, treat it as like a counseling, mentoring kind of space that you're trying to learn from them, especially folks that in pathways that you're interested in. And then the last thing I'll say is LinkedIn is a very powerful tool for this, both for the networking and who's out there, but also to put yourself out there itself. And it's also a space you should be very thoughtful about what you're doing on it and how your profile is set up and things like that. But these are some practical things you can start thinking about or doing and share with others. Also share your experiences with others as well.
Peter, it's such a critical point to emphasize how valuable the federal community is to help us as we move through our career. So thank you so much for reminding us that network of a federal family is the key for us to extend our mission outside of government. I'd love to talk a little bit about this idea of networking, because this is a sticking point for so many of us. This idea of networking feels candidly really gross, an unattractive activity to pursue. And so would love to get your thoughts of, for those of us who don't love networking, where we don't go to happy hours just to meet people and collect business cards, which I think is many federal civil servants, because we do it for the mission, not for ourselves. Would love to get your tips for what you tell yourself or how you frame this concept of networking so it aligns with the value that you just want to do good.
Yeah, I um I think that's such an important thing to think through because it's difficult. It does sometimes it doesn't feel great or you are it's intimidating. To me, I think, a good piece of advice is just call a friend. You have so many people who care about you and who you know and who you've worked with. And so just start by, that's what I did. I just started by calling friends and having some conversations and then, helping them help me think through what are some next steps or what are some things that, I might be interested in. And then they introduce you and you call another friend and you're just there to learn and have a conversation. They're just people. So it's the concept of networking can feel difficult and sometimes off-putting, but talking to people and getting to know cool people and leaning on your friends, um, all of whom care about the same things you do, is, I think, a good way to start. And sometimes it can feel also a little bit like a treasure hunt. Like you have one conversation with someone and there's something to be learned or gained from that conversation. And then you follow that trail and there's another conversation in which a different idea comes to the forefront or a different piece of information is found. So just thinking about it as, seeing where it takes you and thinking about where do you want to go, but how can you talk with people who have similar interests and learn from them and see where that takes you. But start with calling a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely agree with calling a friend, calling mentors, calling for me, that one-on-one connection is very powerful, and you learn a lot in the process about yourself and what other people see in yourselves too, right? So as you're thinking about what your interests are and what you have to contribute, when you're talking with a friend, they have that outside perspective of you. So it's not just about opening new doors and all of the great things that Meryl talked about, right? With, they've been talking in a different circle, and they have new, different prospects that they might be able to introduce you to, but they also can help shed some light onto your own self, and mentors as well, particularly. The other thing I'd say is, Peter talked about volunteering. Volunteering is a great way to not only give back and to provide service, but then also to connect with new people, and so it doesn't feel, Karen, like you talked about, that you're just going to happy hours and trying to, pass business card, which is, those have, value as well. But also, there's different ways you can do it depending on your preference. And then the last thing I would say is look at learning opportunities. Is there something happening in your region or your community that you can go to some sort of workshop and learn something, and then also meet people at the workshop who share your interests as well. And that might be able to also open new doors, and of course get, hopefully some really great insight as well.
And one last thing on this, I know you're saying the icky factor a little bit, like, because you're making it about yourself. That's one thing, but also it's scary. It's scary to be out there. And the fearless part of it, you're not going to do well until you do it, right? So it's like practicing, like doing those calls and talking about yourself. You're going to fumble around in the beginning, but the more you do it, the more confident and comfortable you're going to be, and the more effective you're going to be about talking about yourself, your interests, your skills. And so it's hard, but do as much of it as you can in safe spaces so you get better at it. Yeah.
That fearless point is so rings so true. And I will offer, one thing that I've done as I've navigated those transitions too, is to remind myself that the deep love for the mission area that I want to make an impact in is greater than the fear. And the thing I want to accomplish overrides all those scared feelings that I might have to make me take that step. So thank you so much for being so open and honest, Jenny, Meryl, and Peter, about this, which is something we just don't talk enough about. I know that we are almost at time, and so we wanted to get, before we get to our last question, your input for sessions going forward. We've already received a lot of really excellent ideas about future sessions, but we wanted to take time to ask you all to answer 4 quick poll questions, which have hopefully popped up on your screen. The first is about how effective you feel this webinar has been. The second is how much you agree that you would take the information from this webinar and apply it moving forward. And third is asking for your input on future webinar topics. With a final question about how easy it was for the session and the timing. My colleague Mercedes is going to initiate that poll. You hopefully should see it. Please know your responses are anonymous and they will only be used to inform future sessions. Thank you so much for that input. One last quick lightning round. I know that we all only have just a couple minutes here, but I'd love to ask Peter, Meryl, and Jenny if there is one hot tip you would give to folks for how they navigate the period of transition and looking for their next impactful role outside of government. One tip that they could take after this webinar clicks off that would enable them to take an action that moves them forward. What would that be? And I'll start with Peter.
Can you start with somebody else? Because I just was reading one of the chats and was blanking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jenny, would you mind if I started then with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one tip I would say is just take a moment and jot down some of the things that you do and that you on a daily basis or on a weekly basis that you really care about. Like what are the things that really drive you? And what are the things that you actually like, what are the mechanics of what you're do to enable that? And then think about, and then hopefully that maps to outside of federal service, maybe it's state service or universities or the private sector, where are the different entities? But starting with just sitting down and putting pen to paper and saying, these are the things that I do that are really meaningful to me on a daily, weekly basis, that I want to continue to do.
Amazing. Thank you, Jenny. Meryl.
And then I'd add to Jenny's piece of paper, what do you want and what do you need in a new role? That's a work and a life question. So trying to line that out and just really take stock of what do you need in this transitional time. And then I'd go on a walk outside, take a deep breath, and phone a friend.
Wonderful. Thank you, Meryl. And to round it out, Peter.
Yeah, okay. That last one that you kind of stole is be kind to yourself.
Mhm.
And I think everybody's been dealing with a lot of stress, but make sure you're building in that wellness space for yourself, what you need to be able to be effective in talking about yourself. So you have to be in a good place. So do what you need to do there too.
I
Incredible.
just want to add to one thing Peter said. I know we're at time, but because someone said it in the chat, be proud of what you've done too. Be kind to yourself and be proud.
Thank you so much, Jenny, Meryl, and Peter. What an extraordinary hour we've had with you. You've been so generous in being so open and honest about your transitions and also your insights and perspectives. So now I'm going to turn it back to Mercedes to close us out for the evening.
Thanks so much, Karen. And thank you so much to our panelists and of course to our participants. Thank you all for being here this evening. We know that everyone is busy and we appreciate you sharing your valuable time with us. Please keep the questions and topics coming and we'll try to get to them in upcoming discussions in our FedSupport series webinars. And don't forget to visit our FedSupport website for federal employees in the meantime. You can find upcoming webinar topics, FAQs, blogs, and links to additional resources, as well as the recording of this session and previous webinars. Additionally, you can access tactical support tools and services at FedsForward's site, available at fedsforward.org. For all the federal employees out there, thank you for your service to the country. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.